Welcome everyone to Vivid Voices. It's the first in a series from Vivid Resources of webinars for UX thought leaders like you. Before we go on, audience, just a little production moment. Please go to your speaker view on Zoom to have the best experience, and away we go. I'm Laura Hunter, and since 2004, I've been recruiting for and serving the user experience and information architecture community. My goal for this webinar series is to facilitate conversations that benefit the thought leaders and those that want to lean into creating design. The design that serves today's needs and go beyond existing paradigms. So by creating this series, my hope is to create another space where design thinkers can come together to learn, new design thinking, leverage the past, and create the future. So Vivid Voices is Vivid Resources' way of doing that. Today, we have a very special guest, our first guest, and I'm honored to introduce to you Dan Klyn. Dan and I have been working together, Dan, 2005, and he has honored us today by joining us here for the very first webinar. It was 2005 and Dan and I met, and he basically gave me the privilege of placing him at one of my first and very favorite clients, Fry Multimedia. And ever since he got his first job, called Information Architect, facilitated by me, he's been obsessed with the question of what good architecture means. So his teaching and research at the University of Michigan are focused on applying ideas from architecture in the built environment to what people like us do, or you do actually, with digital products and services. He's been mentored by some of the best people in the field, including Dana Haas-Davis, who's on this webinar. And for the past 5 years, has spent hundreds of hours talking with and collecting stories from the inventor of the field of information architecture, Richard Saul Wurman. The conversation starter that we sent you a few days ago is drawn from that research. And Dan hopes to complete the manuscript of his Wurman biography next year on or around Richard Saul Wurman's 85th birthday. When we're all very excited that that's on its way. I believe you're doing that for MIT, is that correct, Dan?
We'll see. They have expressed interest. It would be very appropriate. They did 6 or 7 of Richard's books over the years, and so we'll see. When you said a year or next March or whatever you said, I had a little mini panic attack. So.
It's just a reminder.
Because I have a real job that I that I get to do every day. And,
That's right. The Understanding Group, which you are the co-founder of.
That's right.
And we're gonna bring you in on this and get you started in just a minute. But I'd like to introduce the panelists that that have also honored us by your presence. We'll start with Dana Haas-Davis. Yay, Dana! Welcome.
Thank you.
Dana is the agency manager at Proficient Digital. But if you ever end up in Portland, Oregon, and you're riding a bus or just seeing them drive by, one thing you'll notice is there's a lot of love and joy in Portland on those buses. And that's because of Dana Haas-Davis. Joy PSA is a labor of love, and you're going to see it all around Portland. Dana, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's an honor.
And of course, we have Karen Kranick. Karen just started her brand new modern accelerator. She's the co-founder of, formerly the VP of InTouch Solutions. Karen is just launching this brand new company, Modern Accelerator. I couldn't be more excited for Karen, and we have our eyes on you, Karen.
Thank you.
You're doing great things. And next we have Konstantin Nikolaitis. Konstantin, welcome. Konstantin, you and I have been working together for a long time as well, and you are the principal of user research and software development at Carnival Interactive, but you're also doing some really interesting things still with Milstein Corporation, but now a company called Company, where you're building an incubator there in New York.
Yep.
Wonderful. Welcome, welcome. Oh, do we have we have Melissa with us. Is that Melissa? Welcome, Melissa. Melissa Vincenton just joins us from, she's the manager at ZS Associates, and somebody I work very closely with on a regular basis. Thanks for joining us, Melissa. And Pradeep Bose. Hello, Pradeep. Welcome, welcome.
Hello.
Pradeep is the EVP of Innovation at The Block in New York. So that would be all of us so far. Welcome, everyone. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you our speaker, our presenter, Dan Klyn. Take it away, Dan.
All right. I don't know if I'm using the technology properly, but thank you, Laura, and thank you especially, as you mentioned in your very generous introduction, for knowing the kind of people in this field who are thoughtful. I had lots of jobs in technology before the job that I got at Rye with Vivid Resources help. And the connections that I made there, specifically with Dana, who's on this call, and somebody else that you placed there, I believe Carl Smith is another one of your people. So just being in this group of your people has really helped me a lot. And so thank you for that. And if any of you are interested in what I'm talking about today, please feel free to send me an email. That is the most sacred communication channel. Curse a pox on your houses, those of you who get emails and don't respond to them. Of all of the crazy stuff that is coming at us, I feel like email needs to be honored. So please, if anything occurs to you about information architecture, it's literally the only thing that I do. If you cut me, little I's and A's fall out. I'm fairly obsessed with this stuff. So I would love to talk with you about it. And the brief plug before I get to what I've got to show you today is the Understanding Group. There's 10 or 12 of us. I don't know how many of us there are, but in Ann Arbor and Grand Rapids, Michigan, and we do information architecture work with really great companies. So if you know people who have complex information that sucks, have them call us because we love it. The messier, the better. So I will turn off my commercial plug now. And what I came to actually talk about and to help get us going conversationally today is about dummies. And what a dummy is, I learned about these from spending a lot of time with Richard Saul Wurman. And what I have in my office here that I have to bring back to San Francisco are dummies that Nathan Shedroff, who, if you don't know who that is, figure it out. He's one of the good ones. Nathan used to work for Richard Saul Wurman at a company called The Understanding Business in the Bay Area back in the day. And he saved these dummies and he brought them to me, and they gave me an opportunity to think about what I do in digital design, and also to think about what Richard does, and to own some ways that I've tried to misuse him, maybe. So this is perhaps a mass confessional for what I started out doing with him was trying to, stick my hand up his back and make him say the stuff that I think he said about information architecture, and to be working on a biography with somebody who is alive, who you can formulate your thoughts about them and then you show it to them and they're like, no, like it's a humbling but exciting process to be able to talk with Richard about all this shit. He's a very vigorous 84-year-old, and so the risk of me misrepresenting him is lessened by his ability to disabuse me of my bad ideas about him. So I check in with him fairly often while working on this biography, and so that's why Nathan brought me these dummies. And so the thing that I have to cop to is I first started getting into the architecture part of information architecture because I was in love with waterfall. when I learned how to help, when I learned how to make Dana and you, it was the world of you and the beauty of a waterfall process where the people care about each other and they understand each other. We made some really good shit back in the day, in the early aughts, e-commerce websites. And so as I moved on from that world, waterfall don't work so good elsewhere. When people don't trust each other, when people don't communicate. And there's lots of reasons why. And so I got into the architecture part thinking, well, architects just boss people around and tell everybody what to do. And that's essentially what I liked about waterfall. So if I can learn about how to do that, and if I can invoke the biggest authority on that that's around, that would be good. And so that was my attempt to like stick my hand up Wurman's back and have him say the stuff that I think that I wanted him to say about this stuff. And what I learned is that he is a different kind of creature than how some of us are put together. And the thing with dummies that is, I think, different than how I ever used prototypes in UX or have seen them used in UX. And I feel like I've been trained pretty well in prototypes. I took a class with Leah Bewley at the IA Summit, Leah Bewley and Todd Zaki-Warfel on making prototypes. And prototypes is, you know, we do them all the time. And, but these dummies, when Richard is working on books, primarily that's the modality that he's interested in expressing himself in his books. Really early on in the project, he makes a fairly high fidelity object that it's called the dummy because it's here's the first couple of pages, but then it just turns into yellow paper. So the importance of the dummy, what he used them for, and again, we didn't have to do this at Fry, so I didn't learn about prototyping as, and architects do this, at least old school architects like Richard, it's to unlock the permission of the client. And I'd been trained a lot in using prototypes with users who represent the kinds of people we need to succeed with, and having them use prototypes. And I learned a lot about that, and that's maybe a different body of knowledge about prototyping. These dummies, they're working in a different way. And what I think they're doing, and from watching Richard make these, so I've tagged along with him. I'm the biggest suck up ever, and I just follow him around, and he loves it because he's an egomaniac. So together we form a pretty good team, and he is constantly trying to, and often succeeding in unlocking the participation and the permission of other people's money. He's got plenty of his own, but for him to do a project and for it to be any fun for him, it has to be other people's money. And so architects, to make buildings, you have to find a way to unlock the imagination of a client. You're unlocking the budget. UXers were so focused on the world of end use and this world of prototypes as a way of getting institutional buy-in from the client and what I connected it to is something that Dana taught me in working in e-commerce. We had a book club among our IA team, and she had us read a book by Paco Underhill called The Science of Shopping, Why We Buy. And my God, that's what these dummies, that's what these are for, is not to, so I've seen Richard refuse to send a PDF of something to someone and instead wait for the meeting and the thing that they need to get first. Mm-hmm. It's not about the content. It's some kind of, and one of the things in UX that's, I think on the rise that I'm really excited about is embodiment. The idea that our cognition, that it ain't just up here, that it's in the whole of our person. And so to sell, look, here's the little pocket yellow pages, and this one doesn't have the listings for people who put rain gutters on your house, because this isn't for using at your house. And how do you make that idea happen? And how do you, this is just blank paper. Most of it is blank paper, but it's the right size. But most importantly, it's that you can give it, that the stakeholder touches it. And this quote from Paco Underhill, when does a shopper actually possess something? Possession begins when a shopper's senses begin to latch on to the object. It begins in the eyes and then in the touch. Once the thing is in your hand or on your back or in your mouth, you can be said to have begun the process of taking it. And that's why the sample's at the store. That's why not a PDF, because you're not going to get it, especially when the scale of it is part of the idea. So his company had a really great contract with the Yellow Pages to do the Yellow Pages, just the normal Yellow Pages. And they innovated the hell out of these and made the Yellow Pages better, did billions and billions of pages of Yellow Pages. But he was selling additional ideas to them on top of his contract. They didn't want to pocket Yellow Pages. So part of Nathan's job was to be in a, this is a client relations thing to learn too, is an internal skunk works based on coming up with good ideas for existing clients and then going to the client with an additional idea, not just to sell in more, but because this is fun, because you can create value together. So that's about all I want to say before passing this off to Dana and asking about the, is that difference that I'm pointing to in these guys, that at Fry, we really never had to unlock the client's permission.
Yes and no. I think like sort of implicit, like our focus, the majority of our focus might have been on the end users, but we were always having to get the buy-in from the client, right? Like they were our sort of gatekeeper. And so to me, like the work that we were doing, and similar with dummies, right, is you're taking, like we have this intention and we're creating, like sort of iterating it into manifestation. And so like the sooner we're able to start to ideate with the clients in a way that's like meaningful to them and they're connecting with it, like I think that opened us up that much more to be able to do more for users. So it's different, right? Like it's different when you're working with something physical, but I feel like we still had the same sort of challenges and the same sort of opportunities to connect with clients in a way that opened everybody up to offering the end users more.
Yeah, no, thank you. Because I feel that at the same time, I'm remembering our 500-page functional specification.
That was a different kind of opening up.
And maybe another way that this is different, and part of what disappointed me initially in studying how Richard does this, is I would have wanted these to be wireframes with lorem ipsum. Mm-hmm. This is the real color. This is getting the page. This is getting the color of the sections of the paper, right? So this is bringing a lot of fidelity to the big picture up front. But to me, these are still, like with our funk specs and our prototypes, they were dual use always.
Right.
They were always for the development team, and also so the client could see that we were getting closer and closer to the thing that got sold.
Right. And sometimes
these guys,
testing.
This doesn't go to any develop. This is like a whole different. And I think our mania to always be shipping and to have prototypes end up in shipped code somehow. Mm-hmm. We fetishize always be problem solving. And in some ways, this isn't problem solving either. This is creating a problem. This is like, oh, fuck, what if we had to make little books?
Uh-huh. Oh. Yeah.
And I swore, I apologize if anyone is, yeah.
No. What I like about that, like the dummies, is it really, like it really unlocks the imagination, right? And it unlocks possibility. And I feel like we do that in different ways, or can do it in different ways. And sometimes we don't do it in different ways. Sometimes we just sort of slug it out.
Same way all the time. I think Melissa has a, hi, Melissa.
Oh, I take myself off mute. No, I would just say I definitely agree. You know, it's something that I've been pushing really hard to do in a management consulting firm where just the presence of human-centered design is very new to a lot of folks that come from MBA backgrounds. But one of the things that I and my team are very keen to try to do is exactly what you're talking about, right? Let's not write a PowerPoint deck. I will be death by PowerPoint, I can tell you all. That is not a job title, but it is what a lot of us tend to do. But really the power is when you can bring something that the client can interact with, right? We don't make physical objects, but at the same time, it's also not good enough anymore to show mock-ups, right? Mm-hmm. It's never been good enough in the past 10 years. I do a lot of enterprise and like seriously complex, hardcore systems. You can't even use lorem ipsum because I spend half the meeting explaining to the clients, that's not Latin. I'm very confused. Yeah. So getting that into their hands, like you said, and letting them be able to click on things, is particularly now with the modern design tools, that really does unlock a lot of possibilities because they're starting to actually use it. And we're not asking them things like, well, what do you think? Well, what would you like? Well,
is the one on the left better or the one on the right? That's a different question.
Yeah, right. And that is not the try to thing that we're trying to do to win work and then get buy-in. And on it, ultimately, it's about gaining trust. You know, are these people worth their salt? And are they going to put their money where their mouth is for me, the client, right? So we don't go in all slick and fancy, which I don't think I could do if I tried. But instead, we go in with things and we tell stories about these prototypes as well, and then we let them play with it.
Yeah, and you can trust there's something about when it pushes back, right? You pick up an object and gravity causes the object to push back. Right. There's something about interaction that goes beyond the visual. We would sometimes give people, do you like A or B? Look at wireframe A and then A_1.1.
Yeah.
Well, do you think like the nature of digital, which makes it so challenging versus the physical, is that I think digital allows you to edit on the fly more or less. Now that's obviously, not, that's exaggerating a little bit, but I think that it's interesting to compare these prototypes or these dummies versus there's this emphasis on MVPs and minimum viable products, or even minimally loved products. How do we what that is?
I like that one better. The smallest thing that you could actually love, which is, again, you could fall in love with this because it's
Well, a question about those dummies is, for me, is how often did he iterate on those? Or was it just for, because I think the interesting question is, if you're just trying to get stakeholder buy-in, I think in a digital world, that's an analog model, right? And obviously there definitely is relevance going from, product world into digital world. There's definitely similarities, but also when we can edit, should we be editing? That's a question I'd like to hear from everyone else. I believe in it personally and believe in talking to the users, but obviously that was not something that Richard Saul Wurman was super keen to do at the time. So how do we feel?
And continues to be an autocratic kind of person. And so he's not interested in a back and forth with anyone. Mm-hmm. And so that's probably a missed opportunity, I would say. Of all of these dummies that Nathan gave me, there are not iterations. There isn't a lower phi and then a higher phi. For his last book, Understanding, which weighs 7 pounds. It's that thick and it's 10 inches by 10 inches. I got to sit in on a meeting where he had just blank paper, mm-hmm. but at that size, as the object that unlocked the permission. And then a little bit later on, he had one bound, but again, just blank. There was nothing applied to it. So I think when he's doing it for himself, maybe there's a little bit of iteration, but it's always for an audience, for a meeting. It's a prop for a conversation always. Totally. And that conversation is, it has to be real time because that's how he wins.
Mm-hmm. It just makes me think too, not to hog up the space, but I'll just say, it makes me think, I was just heard about yesterday, this notion of minimum viable ecosystems. And I'm really fascinated by that because it sort of brings us back to these dummies that he's talking about, and makes us think again about like crossing over into the physical and the digital space and how we can kind of mock that up. Like I'm kind of interested in coming back to this idea of dummies. Like, do we almost, mock up an Alexa experience and think about like, how that translates into like to the phone experience where you're sitting in your living room versus like a car. Like I noticed you have the small dummy, which I know was for portable use, like if you were in your car. So it's interesting that like using those dummies is thinking about the minimum viable ecosystem. But then how, again, can we kind of parallel that to what we're doing?
Or if you're in the skunk works, if you're Nathan Shedroff, you are building an ecosystem of these objects for meetings. But no, I think that is a disruptive as hell thing to think about, the minimally viable ecosystem. And the tool that comes to mind for me. So with digital for us, because we're working on architecture, because we're always in our business working on more than incremental change. That's why one of the many reasons we don't call it design. We're not improving something and making it better. We're changing the thing.
Interesting.
And so in our process, there is a benefit to shifting to physical in the early modeling stage. So this is not a dummy anymore. This is, we're working with the client team, and I kid you not, it may have been because we were stuck at the client's site over a weekend and it was raining, but my colleague made a model that we gave to the chief digital officer 3 days later after he made it, out of pieces of felt and embroidery floss. He made a physical, he's an Eagle Scout, so he has skills. But there was a physical, like you could pet it because it was made out of felt. And it was two-sided, and it was a conceptual model of a completely different way to situate their business offering online. It wasn't a sitemap yet. It was a conceptual, we called them, these are different realms within which your business offering is going to be recombobulated. If we can explain our fucking ideas ever, like this is hard to explain. And so just like this explains itself, it's dumb. I love the word dumb, how it's, a now impolitic word for an inability or absence of speech. There's the idea of being dumb and yet being prolific, or being, this thing speaks even though it doesn't talk. And so a piece of felt that says, this is how you're going to reconfigure your whole digital everything, hacking the format. We're working on digital. We're changing the navigation is what they think we're doing, but we're actually planning out digital transformation, and it would scare people if we called it that. A furry, felt-based physical model is non-threatening. You know how to relate to it because you're in your body and it's embodied, and so you already know how to relate. So I think all of us would do well to consider, is there a way to make a physical artifact, especially if Paco Underhill is right, that if you can get him to touch it or taste it or whatever, make a cake of your conceptual model, but changing format to talk about more than incremental change. I think that's something we need to be able to be good at.
It reminds me, it's a little bit different, but it reminds me of the body storming research method.
It's not, Dana. I think it's exactly the same.
Okay. Yeah, because it feels like.
Would you please, for the people at home, explain what body storming is?
Well, it's a super cool dance. It's kidding. It helps the project team to really play out physical scenarios, and we use it. You use the internal team, but you use it to sort of gain user empathy, or empathy for the users. And I honestly, it's something we have rarely used, or that I've been a part of, but I think it's exceptional, like when you do use it, because it brings the whole body into that moment, or into those moments. And again, it opens up opportunities to see, for people experiencing it, but also the what ifs, bringing in the what ifs and let's try this. And it just opens up the conversation a lot.
Yeah, Dennis Schleicher is one of the people who has given talks about body storming. He gave a talk at World IA Day in Ann Arbor. If you do World IA Day Schleicher body storming, you can find it. One of the reasons I don't think we do it, Dana, is because it's embarrassing. Like, right?
Right.
The same thing with that furry, like, oh my God, you are gonna, this is a $750,000 consulting engagement. And you gave the officer a fucking like felt friend to go like take a little nap with. So you have to be, it goes back to architecture for me and extraordinary clients. That's the only way that you can do good work, is it starts with a client that is willing to give you permission to do good work. And so unlocking it through whatever means necessary.
But do you think that unlocking happens even before you bring in the physical thing? Like that it starts with like trust and that it's an open space and people feel okay to be vulnerable?
Yeah, but yes. And I think trust is you're constantly building that, right? It's why you would have Laura tee you up for a conversation with a great company, even though you know somebody who knows somebody. They already trust, there's already a thing you can start building from. So yeah, you've got a scope of work that's well crafted. You had a legal dance that was functional, right? You've been building trust. Mm-hmm. But I think this is about possession. This is about, oh, that's mine. And for us, we needed the chief digital officer he was pretty new. His team, a lot of them have been there a long time, and we're talking about doing crazy shit. He needed to own this. And so for us, I felt like it was great that we were reined in that weekend.
I like what Melissa had to say about sort of when you were talking about coming in, you're not really pitching in the traditional sense of like showing a slick deck, but it's more about like providing product or service, like, you know, and showing how you do that. And that's something that we very much believe in too, in the work that we're undertaking, is that, you know, we're actually not pitching anymore. We're actually looking to, you know, hire us for like 2 weeks to come in and do a prototype for you so you can actually see. We work on site, like, you know, and they can see what's happening, what's changing. So that's something that has anyone else sort of experienced that, or kind of like bringing again that digital idea, but still coming up with like a product to get that kind of stakeholder buy-in, really.
I think. Should we just jump in stuff? I don't know if I've definitely experienced that. You know, I think a lot of us all, you know, were thrown out. Like, at least I was one of the HCI community people, and then they kind of throw us out in 2000 for me. And they just threw us out in the world and said, make the world usable. And we were like these really weird alien prophets that went into all these organizations, had no idea why we were asking them to do the things we wanted to do. And over the years, we really settled on using a lot of dual purpose prototypes. And what that meant, and I think that you guys are probably along the same space, you've seen this. What that meant was two things, is it was a kind of a bargain, right? We would make a prototype that was meant to be thrown away. It was meant to be done very quickly in the span of 1 or 2 weeks, as fast as you could, right? Rapid prototyping was what they taught us in the old iterative design days. And by the way, you guys have touched on all kinds of methodological things. That's probably a whole other panel that we should bring up and do. But the idea with that was that we could go back to our stakeholders and with the high fidelity, show them a lot about what it was going to be like. But what we found ourselves struggling with and it worked, was being able to actually write like a test, like a usability test that had actionable tasks, the kind that, you know, the right answers are there, but the wrong answers aren't, because you can learn a lot already from a like straight think aloud type usability perspective on that. And we found that we could make prototypes that were really convincing from a fidelity standpoint for our stakeholders, and they could show it to their bosses and be like, look what we're making. But we ensured that even if it took a little more time, that prototype had stories in it that were testable. And then the next challenge for us, which was causing a lot of strict discipline, at least I like to maintain it, and I'm a bit of a data junkie, was expressing to the client that you're allowed to like this or not like this. Whether the user likes it or not is not what we're trying to find. And trying to express to the client that there is this thing called a mental model, and it is a real type of data out there. And so now we can actually give them a task, watch them struggle with it in the UI, and learn about their mental model, and that's an important part of the information that we need to redesign and improve it. And that's different from whether you guys liked it or not. And so that was the kind of world that we fell into fairly quickly after a couple of years of trying these techniques. And it seems to stabilize where it's across the digital realm, it's a very useful way to go. Mm-hmm. If that makes any sense. Now, the thing that's interesting is the industry moved on us, right? The world, you mentioned this before, right? But the notion of waterfall is like this evil term these days, right? And the notion of MVP, which, relates to lean methodology, and the notion of, like, we didn't say it yet, but agile, right? And so you have like lean agile coaches running around the world telling them how to be lean and agile. And so there's a whole discussion there, but I feel like a lot of what's considered to be best practice today is really just turning all the knobs in one direction. Like there isn't, we threw out a little bit of the baby with the bathwater because there is a place for iterative design where you're not actually making an MVP, you're making a prototype because you need to learn about the mind of the user in a certain way. And there's also a place for putting something out in the market and seeing what that says to you, which is more like an MVP. And there's also a place to stop and think about what your users actually need from a work practice perspective. And all those things, I think that the industry just kind of said, well, you've got to be lean and agile. And that's all you have today. And I found that for me, that actually leaves a lot of best practice behind. Mm-hmm. Not that I don't like those techniques. I love them. I was actually a part of extreme programming before Agile existed. There's all those pieces. But, I'm just touching on some of the things I heard. But specifically around prototyping, I think that the marriage of a prototype that is good for doing think aloud protocol and learning about the data point there, which is the mental model of the user, can be married very nicely with the prototype that lets your stakeholders understand what's being done. So that's like something that I think really works as a marriage. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily think that's a way to find out if somebody's going to buy it or find out if or iterate that into an actual product or all those kinds of different pieces. Does that make sense? Or I'm just kind of throwing out questions within that realm as well. And I'm very curious about how, with the experience that this panel has, how you guys view some of those things. I'm alone. I've been in a hole for 19 years just building stuff. But I don't actually know what my community feels about these points. But it feels like we're running into a lot of the same problems. And it feels like we all are seeing that it's difficult to express what you get from these different exercises.
Pradeep, we haven't heard from you. What are you thinking about?
Very inspiring conversations. Thank you for having me be part of this. Much of what I do is in the realm of healthcare, and not to introduce another P into this series of alliterations, but participation is what comes to mind very often when we prototype. I find that much to what Konstantin was describing, some of the most challenging areas for me to work on are also the most rewarding. And those are when we're working with devices, healthcare devices, whether they are, self-injectors, inhalers. One example that comes to mind is a product that we helped name as well called Spencer, which was like Alexa, inspired by Alexa, but it was like a dispenser for medication. And it sits on your kitchen table. And it has rolls of pill pack, which has now been acquired by Amazon for some ungodly sum. And pill pack essentially comes packaged, direct mail to your home, and it spits all the pills packaged in this little plastic bag at the right time, and keeps a compliance count of whether it's been taken off the machine or not. It also has an interface that's essentially an iOS interface that's connected to the cloud and provides a real-time data feedback on compliance. Now, our activation of that device was to create an interface for the caregiver, usually the daughter. The sons are the useless guys, according to market research, not personally speaking. And the daughters will intervene if their parent hasn't taken the appropriate blood thinners or diabetes medication and what you will. And much of the $1.5 trillion that goes into the healthcare is going into managing non-compliance for comorbid patients. Not to throw out jargon, but that's about the aging population who have 3 to 4 different conditions: metabolic diseases, cardiovascular, diabetes, asthma, arthritis, COPD, those types of things. and the number of pills that they have to take is incredible. So when I talk about participation, you know, the notion of this kind of triggered activation between the daughter and the parent really came about through working sessions with these dummy devices and saying, imagine that this is happening on this box right now. You're sitting in your home, and much like, all of the scenarios that you're describing were things that we found to be profoundly useful in unearthing how they would participate with the product and of course through the prototype. And that's the moment in time participation. And the long-term participation is really data gathering. So for example, using collective data in an anonymous HIPAA compliant manner, if we're able to find, and we were able to find some interesting things, and the device is actually being tested across a couple of health systems right now, we're able to find that people who take their pills immediately first thing in the morning are far more compliant than those who say, well, I will take it after breakfast or an hour before breakfast, or, you know. And so those variances became insightful tips that were then fed back onto the communications platform that's attached to the product, the interface for it, right? So, and those are a dynamic growing body of insights that is coming out of collective participation into the data set. So when we think about prototyping something like that, we could think about creating, you know, real world mechanisms within a very small number of ends that would begin to unearth some of these insights long before they would really come to pass, so that your MVP is, you know, a little more V.
I can relate to that a lot because I'm also in the life sciences and healthcare space. So I probably see a lot of challenges that you see in that realm, as well as kind of the way that you approach things, particularly when you're speaking to stakeholders and you're trying to get that buy-in, and then you're trying to work with users. It's a little bit different. Particularly because you're not necessarily asking them to, you know, buy something like, do you like these sneakers, right? It's a little bit more immediate than that, right? They may need medication, they may need a medical device, they may need something else. They possibly don't have a choice. And I think it's our job to help bring these ideas, this inspiration, and these solutions to, let's say, patients or healthcare providers to bring to patients in a way that, you know, kind of inspires confidence, but also helps with that adherence. You know, and I think that's also part of our jobs.
I think, you know, the profound value of participation is visible very quickly in health outcomes. And it's about connecting, you know, data sets on the back end to be able to see the incremental, and this has happened with self-injectors, this has happened with, you know, asthma inhalers. There's a lot of data that Teva published on the innovations on counters, and now the latest product that I'm not working on, but I believe it's coming to market soon, is the inhaler provides feedback on whether or not you took the medication appropriately. So if you didn't inhale at the time that you spray, that you essentially press down on the inhaler, then there's a mistiming between the firing and the inhalation. And most people get it wrong. And so in which case it tells you immediately to take another puff. So those types of things need to be prototyped in a participatory model, because a 30-year-old versus a 70-year-old with asthma is inhaling with different strengths the same aerosol or the same powder. And their personalized dosing is going to be defined by the feedback mechanism of that device. So that's how critical the participation model of prototyping becomes. It's a difference between literally taking the medication and not taking the medication. And I know we're getting into, you know, health nerd land here, but, you know.
Well, I'm curious, Pradeep, if you've had different results with physical let's just say something that you could hold in your hand, contrasted with getting participants to prototype or to give you feedback on screen-based. Have you noticed is there anything categorical about what you're able to do with one?
I think there is. I think, one of the things that I observe is perhaps the corollary of that question, which is, and this, I love doing this, giving people a device that, let's say, has been baked, it's ready to go, it's sometimes in market, and seeing how they interact with it to understand how to communicate how to use that device. So I know that that's not directly what you're asking, but
no, it's great though. Yeah, because it gets one of our participants in the attendee section had a question about props. Like there is a prop quality to a dummy, to some of the devices that you were describing, and the question from the audience, which I thought was great, was, this is a mock-up of a book that's going to be a book, and we've got a device that is on its way to becoming the real device, but are there other props that can be used while we develop our thinking together, either as designers and or with the client, that have nothing to do with the modality of the product that we're working on? And I'm putting way too many words into this questioner's mouth.
But I think it goes in all three directions, if you will. And I think, when Konstantin mentioned the mental map, for the most part, we as designers think of, or I shouldn't include myself because I'm not really a designer. I'm a sheep in wolf's clothing here. I don't really belong to the elite panel. I'm just the sales guy. But when we're talking about design, let's say, there is a hypothesis about the mental map. But really, what we find is, whether we're designing a device or whether we're designing communications related to a device, and I'll leave it to that scenario, what becomes very obvious very quickly is that different people have different mental maps, right? And one approach to that is not to show them the device. Just tell them what it's supposed to do and let them tell us how they would want it to work. And then we look at the delta between reality and what their projection is. And, you go to Asia, you flip the light up and you say, hey, why isn't the light coming on? Because that's the off position. So the difference between what people expect and what we have at hand to deliver is often most visible by not showing the product, right? Wow. Because they come up with the imagination of, oh, it's an auto injector for insulin. This is how it should work. And then we go scratch our heads and say, gee, that's not quite what we have here. So then we get to the next step, which is, okay, let's take a different cohort of people, give them the product, and then tell them, what do you think this does? And what do you think this counter is telling you? Or what do you think this bell curve of inhalation versus the pushing down the lever, what do you think that is exactly telling you? That you got 75% of the medication, or did you get 25%? What does that actually tell you? So those are the types of the gap between a graphic or a visual is also profoundly important when you look at global product development. And different cultures, as we all know, will have different iconic and visual modalities that they understand and relate to.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, and this is another from the peanut gallery, if you will, examples of, and I love what you said about ways of testing and prototyping where you don't show it. And the question was about when prototyping or using dummies has gone awry. And so curious for the panel. And so for me, my personal practice in order to preempt prototypes that go awry is to either format shift them to flannel or some shit, like to just take it where you're absolutely gonna misunderstand it, or to work at a really high level of abstraction. I'm curious because if you show I'm terrified of the thin slice, that if I show you a medium to low fidelity prototype, that you're not going to understand how awesome it is yet. And so I'm curious if anybody's had a prototype go awry where people misunderstood the concept, where you lost the gig, somebody said, okay, stop the project, that sucks.
So this is a great topic because I think many of us have at least once kind of run into, I approached this completely wrong. One of the things that I've learned over the years, and I've trained my team to do, is we don't do things in super low fidelity because, and again, this is about my clients. So I'm on the East Coast, right? I'm not on the West Coast where everybody's, confident in all this technology, and right, we're in the Wayback Machine. They're like 10 years behind. They're also, oh, you think I'm kidding?
Hang on. I have to say, from the East Coast, we have the opposite perspective. That East Coast is a bunch of dummies in suits, and West Coast is full of all the smart people pushing the envelope.
That's exactly right. So what happens is, and all my clients are business people, right? So they're not creative, right? And so if you go over, you can go over off the rails a little bit and terrify them because they cannot extrapolate, hey, this is my concept. And you're like, yeah, but I'm the head of insert this, division or whatever, and here I am in my khakis, right? That does not work. I learned this, but I learned this a while ago. So this hard lesson, instead what we do is we come with something that we can spin up very, very fast, but looks totally polished. There's no back end. You don't drop all that time and money into it. We also come in with, and I want to call back to something that Konstantin was speaking about, because essentially, Konstantin, you were talking about mashups. It's a mashup of how I do my work, right? It's not just this one thing. It's a piece from over here and a piece from over here and a piece from over here that's going to get my audience and my clients to resonate with what I'm trying to talk about. And you have to be, you have to be a little bit savvy. And, it does absolutely work. The one place that I personally, and everybody else is going to have a different experience, found it does not work is when you go to a client and why you think you're there and why the client thinks you're there are not the same thing. That is when it does not work. But that's not really the problem that we're talking about, right? Because the one and only time it's ever crashed and
That's Pradeep's problem. That's the sales guy did it wrong.
We don't have sales guys. I mean, sometimes, right, you just get people that maybe they're not great people, right? Maybe they're, and I could go on a whole giant tangent about that, but I won't. But I mean, otherwise, we feel that we really do understand your challenge. And so, for example, if we show up and they think we're a bunch of order takers, it goes really badly because we're not. That's not what we do. That's not what my job is. And then they get very, very upset when you try to do some kind of dummy and, ideation and inclusatory session. They don't want to do that. They already know the answer, and that leaves us down the wire over here. So.
Actually, just one thing to add with what you're saying, Melissa, I totally agree with everything you said. But I will say this, I think it's an important point. If you have a rejection, if you're making a demo and they're rejecting the basic premise of that demo, you should have done something well before then to figure that out. I feel like by the time you're making your prototype, there's earlier stages in the process where you align on the actual what you're trying to make and why you're making it. I don't think prototyping is the tool to align on functional vision. I think it's
right.
Yeah.
And the example that I'm citing actually was not a digital prototype or a demo. It was more like, there's all kinds of business problems, right? And so this one was more about empathy for patients and how do we get there, right? So it was this already intangible question. And they basically wanted to understand from a strategic perspective how to do that so that we could down the line maybe do something digital. So we were like way upstream, but they thought they were just going to tell us that. So.
I have one thing I want to throw at the group just to think about for later, just 10 seconds, but we're in this world right now where we have very mature design patterns in the 2D space, whether it be on a phone or a web app. We're all building things and we kind of know a lot about how we're going to build them ahead of time. there is a coming wave of VR and, more importantly, augmented reality, especially for work practice, where none of these patterns exist, and it is the Wild West for us UXers all over again. And the ability to prototype in those spaces, nobody knows how to do. And so there's something that relates to these 3D models and the digital. It all comes together in this like coming wave of augmented reality design that I think is a really interesting topic for us to consider over some time.
Yeah, I'm curious, is anybody on the panel working in augmented or virtual?
I just made my first demo. So I just made a very high fidelity prototype demo in augmented reality on the Magic Leap, and it was an extraordinary. Come on in, guys. The water's fine. It's
right.
like
it's all 3D, right? Is it? It's all 3D, yeah.
Yeah, it's a 3-dimensional. It's real. I mean, you literally are wearing the glasses. You think it's a real object in space, but you have to invent everything all over again. There's no way to do anything.
Yeah, I've seen some of those prototypes come in. I actually submitted somebody who was doing that type of prototyping to ZS for something, because it was fascinating to see, just very different in terms of the visualization for somebody like myself, not sitting behind glasses, and how it's visualized in presentation. But you know, as a recruiter, I'm really truly excited about that next phase to see what the brilliant minds that I'm honored to work with are coming up with in terms of how to prototype for design in that space. And we are now at 5 minutes until the hour, and somebody's kitty showed up to say hi. Hello, kitty. First of all, I just want to thank you all. I cannot tell you how honored I am. This has been an incredible first webinar. Dan, thank you. I didn't even introduce prototypes, permission, and procession. And thank you for the additional P, pro. What I think this is going to do is, I think we have another great idea for another webinar, thanks to you, Constantine. I think augmented reality is a great another one. But moving forward, on September 10th, we have a 99% commitment from Mr. Richard Saul Wurman for the second part of this webinar that Dan has so kindly brought to us. And it is our hope and our belief that on September 10th, Mr. Wurman will be here with us for the next part of this two-part series in this webinar. So you'll all be invited to join us again. We'll be sending out this webinar and additional information and links and all kinds of great juicy stuff to all of you and everyone in the audience as well. Thank you for your audience questions. We are gonna now go to a raffle. Woohoo! Yeah. And let's see, we're gonna be doing the raffle. I can't believe this went by so fast. So it's, but before we do the raffle, I just wanna see, I'd like to invite each of you as panelists to give closing statements. And before that, you're wondering who this beautiful young lady is? Oh yes, there's the, you're all wondering who this beautiful young lady is who's quietly come in and out. This is my assistant, Alexis Friel. We thought we'd have her involved because she's a young, not even millennial, I don't even know what we call your generation, but who was raised on technology and has used everything that you've created all these years. So, hi, Alexis.
Hi, everyone. I'm actually Gen Z, I think.
Gen Z, there it is.
Yeah.
So if she had any questions, she would let us know. But in the meantime, we've run out of time. Each panelist, I would invite you each to have a closing statement if you'd like to. And let's begin with Constantine.
Okay, closing statement. I didn't expect that. All right, so there's a couple things I found super interesting. Obviously, we talked about augmented reality. I think that the prototyping problem is going to be a huge one that we have to figure out in these new spaces. So that's a huge topic. The second is, I think that just from hearing everybody, I think we have a lot of agreement around the use of prototypes in lots of different domains. But I think that as we get into new spaces, the methodological problem is going to be huge. I think as a community, we have to figure out when we use MVP, when we use prototypes, when we do upfront kind of anthropological style research, like when do we do these different things? What is work practice versus work model? And I think it's our role to guide the product teams through those decisions. So that's a whole other like deep question that I think comes with the new territory that's coming in VR and AR. and IoT for that matter, because I think that because we're going to be in the Wild West again, all this stuff is going to matter a hell of a lot more.
Wonderful. Thank you, Constantine. Go ahead, Karen.
Oh, sorry, just going to say, I totally agree. And I think that, you know, test early, prototype early, test often. I think it's definitely, it was the way of the past, and I think it's even more the way of the future.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Dana, any words from you?
Just thank you again for all this. It's amazing and so inspiring. And I think for me personally, like I have always been a from the heart IA and designer, and it's just so exciting to start to see more of the paradigm shift from the mind into the whole body.
Beautiful. I love that. Pradeep?
I think of prototypes as empathy products.
Mm.
And when I think of that, it's not just a thing that'll become something else, but in and of itself, it can become a brand shaping experience. While it's not the product, things like Parkinson's gloves or arthritis gloves, these are profound prototypes that have actually found their way into the market and shape education and awareness and understanding. So I think somebody asked, what do you do with prototypes after their utility has been served? I think that's a great question that we should constantly ask ourselves, that many of the times these prototypes are empathy products that they themselves can go into market.
Wonderful. Thank you, Pradeep. Melissa, any closing statement?
Sure. Parting remarks. No matter what, remember that everything is not prescriptive. And also do things with cats, but make sure that make sure that anything that anybody throws at you, you kind of grab everything in your arsenal, because a lot of times that's how you're going to solve the problem. It's never going to be linear. Mm-hmm. And also surround yourself with your very smart colleagues. They're going to give you other perspectives and ways to look at things. And that's how you're going to, I think, get through a lot of these new challenges. And don't be afraid to try to do human-centered design for anything, even if you've never done it before, even if it sounds scary like VR, it doesn't matter. Try it anyway, because even if you fail spectacularly, you'll learn twice that much back.
Thank you, Melissa. Dan, from you, my friend.
I think being dumb is underrated, and if there's, I find myself all the time trying to be impressive and trying to be valued on the basis of something that is a commodity or what have you. And I think there's something humbling and good for us to work in a dumb way. So I would encourage you to, if you think you're really smart, you thought something up that was really smart, think about what's the opposite of that. Is there a way that you could do it dumber? Is there a way you could do it more physical? Is there a way that you could make it more of a whole body experience? And then the last thing, and we'll, if you come next time, you can see if this is valuable or not, but I've gotten so much value out of giving myself a lot of permission to not be right up to the leading edge of where all of this is going, and to instead be moving in the opposite direction. And so there are futures that we could be living in right now that would be far better than the one that we are in, that people in the past talked about, knew about, and we've just blown right past. So if you feel information anxiety about drinking from the fire hose of what is the most current, in historical research into our field, there are men and women who have thought up stuff that's way smarter than the end of the fire hose. So history, do some of that.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you guys so much. Stick around. We're going to announce some raffle winners, and the panel is welcome to stay for a little bit, and for any of those of you who are able to, and have a little post talk after we say goodbye to the audience. In the meantime, I am waiting for my raffle winners, and Marcella, I believe, is my producer, who should be bringing those to me right now. Marcella, where are my raffle? Okay, we have 3 winners of the Information Architecture for the Web and Beyond 4th edition Polar Bear book, which is kindly being donated in PDF form from Los Angeles user experience professionals, whose president is our producer, Marcella Masirian. Thank you, Marcella. Kathy Hammond, Joshua Line, and Eunice King. Congratulations, you are our book raffle winners. And then we have 3 swag bags from Vivid Resources. And those 3 winners are David Weissman, Iris Kim, and Carol Crump. Congratulations, David, Iris, and Carol. You'll all 3 be receiving a swag bag from Vivid Resources. And
look at this.
Here's the big one. There it is. Look at Dan. Look at Dan. That's right. We have compliments of Mr. Klyn himself, the Good Fit IA poster. It's the last one in print. Everything else is digital only. It's the last IA poster of its kind available. And Jenny Blatz, you are the lucky winner. Congratulations, Jenny.
Jenny, make sure Laura has your postal address and there will be a tube coming your way.
Absolutely. Jenny, send us your postal address. Let's see, Marcella, how shall we do that? Shall I have her put that in? Actually, I'll let you handle that, Marcella, and we'll get you taken care of. Jenny, we have your email address, so we will email you and get your physical address. In the meantime, audience, thank you so much for joining us today on the first ever Vivid Voices webinar from Vivid Resources. We so greatly appreciate you, and thank you, panelists. It's been an honor to have you all here. I look forward to our next webinar on September 10th. You'll all be invited. And until then, everyone have a beautiful, wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.